It's genuinely dumbfounding how Capcom greenlit a sequel to Street Fighter. To say that Street Fighter 1 is a bad game would be an understatement. The game has little to no redeeming qualities when played today and should only be booted up as a novelty to see how far the franchise has come. There are only 2 playable characters, and they're both clones of one another, Ryu and Ken. They both only have 3 specials, a Shoryuken, a Duken, and Tatsu. There are only 2 modes as well, a traditional single-player story/arcade mode and a 1v1 traditional versus mode. I can give a pass for the lack of content for a game released in 1987 though, that's not why I'm so critical of it. The main reason I'm so annoyed at this game is because of how bad it feels to play. The controls and movement feel awful. Aerial attacks have a century-long delay to come out. Sometimes your character just doesn't react or respond to your input, and more. But I could look past all of that if it wasn't for the fact that specials feel impossible to come out. What do I mean? Specials in this game do use the traditional fighting game inputs like quarter circle and Z inputs. That much is true. But these inputs just don't function? They work on a negative edge system, meaning to use a special, you need to hold down the attack button, do the input, and release the button. That by itself would feel clunky, but there's such specific timing to do the inputs that the game is looking for that it feels like it gives you frames of wiggle room to get the attack out. The game isn't even aesthetically pleasing. Most stages have hideous color palettes, the character sprites, and especially portraits look underbaked, which is disappointing because the concept art for the game and characters has a much nicer aesthetic. And overall, the game has a very drab and unsightly look. There are a couple of stages that do look okay. The alternative Japan stage, the 2 Chinese stages specifically, do stand out to me as high points. Unfortunately, you can only play on these stages in the arcade mode, as the versus mode is locked to 2 stages, one in the US and one in Japan, neither of which look good. Capcom couldn't even get the music right, which baffles me because the company did have talented musicians working for them at the time. The original Mega Man would release only a few months after Street Fighter, and that soundtrack is an all-time classic. Eagle and Sagat's stages in particular have such grating and headache-inducing themes. The OST isn't just forgettable and mediocre, it's genuinely bad and unlistenable at some points. At least the credits music kind of turned out alright. Going back to the arcade mode for a minute, the enemies you fight are just frustrating. They do more damage than you, they're faster, and many have an unfair gimmick. Luckily, their AI is usually fairly easily exploitable, with one exception: Sagat. The final boss of Street Fighter 1 and the big bad of the franchise before Bison. Sagat often can completely ignore your attacks or attack through them. He also hits like a truck and has a fireball that's significantly faster than yours. Beating him feels like dumb luck. But with all that said, I don't think there's any denying there's decent bones and alright foundation laid in the original Street Fighter. The game's classic 6-button attack system and motion inputs revolutionized the genre and would lay the groundwork for every traditional 2D fighting game going forward. It's hard to acknowledge that and appreciate that in the face of everything the game does wrong, but the fundamentals for the game could be so much worse. In closing, there is zero reason to revisit this game. It's clunky, ugly, and unintuitive. I encourage you to play its far more popular and beloved sequel instead. 1.5 out of 10, closer to a 2 than a 1.